with that 2020 hindsight, I mean, Ben Shapiro seems like a big part of your political evolution.
Yes. They're not going to let us into the White House if you're with us.
But the pressure in this scenario came exclusively from the Daily Wire.
Yes. For them, it was very easy that if they detected that a promising young guy was going to become anti-Israel in the conservative movement, they could crush that person.
Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes, of all people, just sat down together and had a discussion about the evils of the pro-Israel neocon right. How it's thrown a wrench into the type of America First governance that a large portion of the right wants, but can't obtain because of neocon stooges like Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin and Lindsey Graham. This is going to be an amazing one. Let's see what they have to say. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
I tweeted to Ben Shapiro. I said, I've never seen anything on the Daily Wire that's actually critical of Israel. And he quote tweets me. And at this time, I have 1,000 followers on Twitter.
How old are you?
I'm 18. I'm a freshman.
Still a freshman in college, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this is even before I started my show. And I don't know, I probably got 100 likes on this tweet. It wasn't a viral tweet. He quote tweets me and says, "To accuse a Jew of dual loyalty is the surest sign of anti-Semitism." And this is how it sort of begins. And I see this tweet. And by the way, that was on Christmas Eve in 2016.
He immediately called you an anti-Semite.
Mm-hmm. So I'm driving to Christmas Eve Mass with my family. And I see on Twitter, the notification comes up, Ben Shapiro quote tweets me, calling me an anti-Semite. And I was like, what is this? Why is this guy attacking me? Because I don't have a platform at this time. I'm not an influential guy or anything. And so then I put out another tweet similar. I said something like, if you're China first, you should live in China. If you're Mexico first, you should live in Mexico. If you're Israel first, maybe you should go live in Israel. And again, he quote tweets me and says, you're an anti-Semite.
That same night?
This was, I think, a couple weeks later.
I mean, that's obviously the first response of a lot of the Israel firsters here, is to jump straight to that. There can't be any reasonable critique of Israel or the U.S.-Israeli alliance whatsoever that doesn't relate to anti-Semitism. This is their propaganda. That's what they want to sow. And it's been used so many times that thankfully people are starting to see through it, just as they were able to see through appropriately so when the liberal establishment did this, when it came to, just throwing out accusations of racism or sexism at any opinion that conflicted with the liberal establishment. That is what we've seen. And this is something that Max Blumenthal talks about a lot when he says that, contrary to the notion that the Israeli regime hates anti-Semitism, they actually love it. Why? Well, that seems so counterintuitive, right? But they use it as propaganda. They say that, in a convenient way for them, that every criticism levied toward us can just be excused because it's anti-Semitic. And that's what you hear time and time again. Never have to actually deal with the arguments in question, never confronting the substance of those arguments, just pinning it on anti-Semitism. So that's why Netanyahu and his right-wing Likudniks and his cutouts in the United States, including Ben Shapiro, love to use that line. I hate to tell them, it's not working as much as it used to.
Happened a little bit further down the line. And so...
Were you surprised that he knew you were?
Yeah, I was. I was surprised at why he cared.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, how does he even know who I am or what I'm about? And It turned out that Cassie Dillon, she had texted him earlier and she wanted him to take me under his wing. She texted him after that debate and said, you really like this guy. He's amazing. He did this great debate. She goes, but he's a little too pro-Trump. He's a little too Trumpy. And he goes, I'll take a look. And so I guess the two of them were kind of grooming me in a sense. They wanted me to go maybe and be a Daily Wire, or maybe looking me as a potential conservative activist or influencer.
I mean, this is ironic, especially because if you remember, Levin and Shapiro were in the never Trump camp in 2016. They despised Trump. They saw him as someone who would end the wars. It's comical to laugh about that now, given how Trump has replicated their foreign policy preferences by and large almost to the extent they want, outside of outright putting boots on the ground in Iran. But at that time, they were never Trumpers. And this is also ironic in that apparently they're trying to groom, Nick Fuentes in the direction of being a neocon, but actually they ended up being able to groom Donald Trump in the direction of neocon foreign policy as it pertains to Venezuela, flirting with regime change there, keeping the weapons and intelligence flowing into Ukraine, bankrolling the genocide in Gaza, launching a war against Iran, something that Netanyahu's always wanted, bombing Yemen for a month straight, this $40 billion bailout, marketed as a currency swap to a country having trouble paying its debts to Argentina, on and on and on again.
And so they started paying attention to me, and the more critical of Israel I was, I started to get this really intense pushback from the both of them and from a lot of the people at Daily Wire.
Why do you think, so you're an 18-year-old college freshman, you're clearly talented and you're engaged, you're really interested, and you ask not crazy questions like, what is this? Mm-hmm. And rather than explain it, they just call you a racist, call you an anti-Semite. Like, that's the first response. That seems like the least effective. Well, it turned out to be not very effective in your case, but that seems like the least effective thing you could do. Why do you think they did that?
Well, I think that you have to look at it not in retrospect, because hindsight is 20/20. And so looking back, you could say they made a terrible mistake because look at sort of what they provoked or what they catalyzed. But at that time, you got to consider, I'm 18 with no following, with no network. I'm coming from the suburbs of Chicago. My parents didn't go to college. I have no connections. And so for them, it was very easy that if they detected that a promising young guy was going to become anti-Israel in the conservative movement, they could crush that person easily and grind them under the heel.
Yeah, I agree with them 100%. That's what they did. That was the ploy, and I hate to say it worked, especially, before just a few years ago, where dissidents saw this trick for what it was, to just grind someone like a bug, to call them anti-Semitic, just for having criticism, obvious ones and, legitimate ones against the U.S.-Israeli alliance, saying, hey, we spend too much on this. It's not America first. It doesn't serve our benefits. When's the last time it served our benefits? They could squash that person like a bug by using the anti-Semitic response, just declaring that person hates Jews. And that's what they did, and it worked. But more and more laymen are now waking up to that. I think it's in large part due to the independent media bringing about new voices, I dare say, like Tucker's, when he's went off on his own, and Nick Fuentes, and people like Dave Smith and Aaron Matei and Max Blumenthal. We wouldn't call these people part of the political establishment at all, but they tell the truth. And that's why people are waking up more and more.
So they sort of were alerted, oh, there's a precocious young guy that isn't on board with Israel. We'll keep an eye on him. And if he gets too vocal or popular, we'll cut him down, we'll crush him. Because at this time, as you know, in 2017, it's a very different time. 2016, 17, any criticism or dissent on the subject was a death sentence. You became radioactive, unhireable, blacklisted, and that's exactly what happened. And basically from then on, it was just this escalating series of blacklisting, censorship, hit pieces, rumors to try to ostracize me from the movement. And
while you're a college student?
Yes, as a freshman, yeah.
So looking back with that 2020 hindsight, Ben Shapiro seems like a big part of your political evolution.
Yes.
How ironic is that, by the way, that was an influence on Fuentes, but it's right that what the neocons do is so counterintuitive. By doubling down on Israel's genocide and calling you an anti-Semite if you happen to question these things, and saying that the Israeli regime, the right-wing Likudnik regime, is indistinguishable from Judaism itself. In fact, it is Judaism. That's what they claim. You're only going to get the product of Israel criticism and critiques and denunciations of Israel. That's what we've seen play out.
You went from a fan/acolyte to an opponent and then just pivoted against everything that he believes.
Yeah, it was because it was this new dialectic that Trump forced.
Yeah.
Trump planted the seed.
And the seed was America first.
Yes.
So once you accept that, a lot of the way we're doing things becomes impossible to support or justify.
Right. The contradiction becomes apparent. It gets moved to the center and it becomes unignorable if you're consistent.
So what kind of efforts did they make to make you go away?
So this is a couple of months down the line. First they would try to dissuade me from asking questions because I was friends with a lot of the Daily Wire writers, not just Cassie Dillon, but many of them were Jewish. And I would ask them point blank. I would say, so why do we give Israel all this money? $3.8 billion per year? What is that for? And they would say, well, there's a really good answer for that, but you're asking it in the wrong way. You're asking it in an anti-Semitic way. I'd say, I'm asking for the proof. What's the argument there?
Every way asking that question to the Daily Wire is going to be called an anti-Semitic way, by the way. And how correct is he when he says that the hypocrisy is too glaring and self-evident and impossible to ignore when you preach as a cornerstone of your platform, America First, but yet you're shoveling billions of dollars into the coffers of Netanyahu at a time, no less, when the U.S. has a debt crisis, $38 trillion in debt now, and since October 7th, giving this rogue regime participating in a genocide that the U.S., my criminal government, is bankrolling, giving them $25 billion since that time. It's too glaring.
And so first it was the sort of, hey man, could you kind of tone it down? Maybe just don't bring that up so much. But I was persistent because at this time I was genuinely inquisitive. I wanted to know, is there an actual reason? And I was actually expecting that there was a really good reason for all of it. And the more that I read, the more that I dug into the subject, the more I found out there's a lot of these NEOCON Jewish types behind the Iraq War. There's the foreign aid complex, which is really unique. There's AIPAC, which is this intense foreign lobby where it's bipartisan. It seems to be the only thing that the parties can agree on. And so it just made me burn more with curiosity. So I just kept asking them. And eventually they said, you know what? We're not going to talk to you anymore. And these are my friends. I met them, went to Christmas parties with them. And all of them one day said, you're done. We're blocking you. We're never going to speak to you again. We're never going to have you on our show. And I said, wow, like this seems like inhuman. I'm struck by how impersonal this is. Like
it is. And if you want to actually dissuade someone from their position, make the pro-Zionist arguments. And I get it. They're impossible to make now. It seems like more and more that's the case 2 years into this genocide in Gaza. But the way in which some of these Zionists have responded to the questions and to analysis and to kind of trying to be curious about these sorts of issues has only driven people in a different direction. I think Nick Fuentes is emblematic of that. I think that there's lots of other figures on the right that are emblematic of that. Candace Owens, because remember when she tweeted, it's a genocide's wrong no matter who does it. That's what she tweeted. And that was the focus of the indignation of the Zionists on the right. When she criticized Brian Mast for saying there's no such thing as an innocent Palestinian, that's what drew the ire of Candace Owens to say, that's insane. That's genocidal language. And for her to say that introduced all sorts of attacks on her, much like many of the attacks against Nick.
I thought we're friends, we're all conservatives, maybe we disagree on one issue. Now I'm being canceled by the right. So I was shocked by this.
When was this?
This was February or March 2017.
So you're still a freshman in college?
Yes.
Are you even paying attention to college at this point?
No, not at all. And my grades started to suffer because I was just really focused on this.
So that's pretty young to get canceled and pretty young to have friendships destroyed over politics. Like that's usually, like decades down the line.
Right.
What did you do?
Well, I just became more emboldened. And so I took this story on my show. At this time, I was on RSBN and I had this show, which I named after the inaugural. It's called America First. And I would kind of subtly bring up the Israel topic and say, this is something you're not allowed to talk about. This seems like an apparent contradiction. It's a big problem. And they escalated their attacks. Cassie Dillon would call my boss, who she was friends with, at RSBN every day for weeks, saying, you'll never believe what Nick said on his show tonight. It's so racist. It's so bad. You got to take him off the air. It's going to make you look bad. And I would then get word from my boss, Joe Seals. He was the founder at Right Side. And he would call me up and say, I don't know what has gotten into Cassie. I thought you guys were friends, but she is calling me every day hysterically, demanding that I fire you. And I was like, wow. So it just keeps getting worse. It starts with this, they're very weird about the subject. Then they don't want to talk to me. Then they're trying to get me fired. And I'm thinking, okay, so clearly what I'm asking about, there's some truth there that they don't want.
I should have asked you this earlier, did anyone during the course of, pre-cancellation say to you, here are the reasons? You're not asking the question correctly, but there are reasons that our foreign aid to Israel is so high. And here's what they are.
They did, but in a very general and vague way. As you know, it's never specific. They would say things like, well, they're our partner in the Middle East. They're a democracy in the Middle East. Just as very vague.
Which is absurd. It depends on which side of the territories, the occupied territories that you're a part of, whether, it's even a democracy, whether they can vote. They certainly can't vote in the West Bank and Gaza over Israel's, elections, not whatsoever. They have, half the rights, if that, of Israelis, probably less than that. They have a blockade blocking what comes in and out, strictly controlled whether they can move within and without, a judicial system that's two-tiered, less property rights in almost every single way, restricted trade rights. Their rights are curtailed. It's not a democracy, or at least it's not one where they have any influence in the Israeli government, and I'm not the biggest fan of democracy anyways. Okay, so I have several disagreements with Nick Fuentes, several major ones actually, in terms of economics and some things regarding civil liberties and such like that. But if this guy's a monster that the Zionists think that he is, they built this monster. They created this monster, if that's what Nick Fuentes is, by how they've responded to him and critics like him when he brings up legitimate topics about why this relationship exists to the extent that it does. Now, I don't always agree with his argumentation. In fact, I think that it's not right that this is a deeper problem than being a criminal government. Nick sometimes says that this is a Jewish problem and not an Israeli problem, but I think that actually takes too much culpability and blame off of, the Christian Zionists and the atheist Zionists that push this disaster too. These disastrous policies that have cost so many lives, ruined so much wealth, shoveled it overseas for entangling alliances that are of no benefit, regime change operations and 20-year occupations of Afghanistan and Iraq for nothing. And that should be resting at the feet of the individuals in government that had the levers of power that supported it, whether they're Jewish or Christian or atheist, etc. But the way that the Daily Wire and a lot of the most ardent Zionists respond to Nick, and still do it to this day, is very indicative of creating Nick Fuentes as you see him today. I really think that's true.
It's rhetorical. And I read The Israel Lobby by Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt, and they break it down very succinctly that there's no real strategic benefit. Actually, there's strategic liability. Eastern Mediterranean is not a strategically important region. The intelligence that Israel provides is not useful. Actually, it's detrimental because they frequently lie. The technology we give them, they pass along to the Chinese, which was a big scandal.
Jonathan Pollard's information that was seized from Navy intelligence when he served as an Israeli spy was actually given to the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War, by the way. And that book is fantastic, by the way. Get Mearsheimer and Walt's The Israel Lobby. It's the best book on this subject. And it's mind-blowing that this came out in, I think, 2007 or 2008, that book was released. It blew people's minds at the time. There was nothing like it. There wasn't any of these attacks against the Israel Lobby until that book that were prevalent.
So I would give them all this and say, yeah, that's not adding up. And they would say, yeah, well, you really just can't talk about that.
Your friend said that to you?
Yes.
Wow. Okay, so what happened to your job? The Right Side broadcasting gig?
Eventually I got fired. I got kicked out.
Why?
Because one of these clips that Cassie Dillon had a problem with, she ran it up the flagpole. She took it to Media Matters, actually, which is a left-wing outfit. They're like a cancel mill. And
wait, the Daily Wire person took it to Media Matters?
Yes.
Are you sure?
I'm 99% sure.
Huh.
Just think about this. This is the true woke right. I know that's what some people on the right that are Zionists use to try to attack people that are critical of Israel. That's just what they mean when they say woke right. But this is the true woke right. When you act indistinguishable from the left, I should say liberal establishment cancel cult and trying to get people fired for their jobs for having the wrong opinion. This exists on the right too, folks. It's just a different flavor of woke. It's the red flavor of woke. It's the red fruit punch Kool-Aid flavor of woke instead of the blue raspberry variant that the liberal establishment used.
What was the clip?
It was a clip, ironically, where I was talking about the travel ban, the so-called Muslim ban, and I was defending it. And I said that the First Amendment does not protect foreign nationals. It doesn't protect Salafists, Wahhabists.
Right.
He's like, I said, they're saying that there's a constitutional right for radical Muslims to come here. And I said that, how are they protected by the First Amendment? They're foreign nationals. And the authorial intent of the First Amendment was actually not even to protect that to begin with. It's kind of anti-Christendom radical ideology. So it's something, ironically, that probably Shapiro and Cassie would agree with, but they recognize the currency that a clip like that would have with the left. Because the left could say, you're Islamophobic, you're racist.
So she brought that to the left, saying, look at this guy. It's not that he's anti-Israel, but he's anti-Muslim.
Yes.
Well, that's very interesting.
Yes.
And so that clip appears on Media Matters, which at the time, I was the subject of a lot of attacks from them at the time. And people kind of listened to them.
Yeah.
Including on the right, they listened to them.
Yes.
So what happened?
So I had to write an apology. My boss called me up and said, you need to apologize for what you said.
For being anti-Muslim.
Yes. And so I didn't write, I'm sorry, but I had to write something like, well, I should have chosen my words more carefully and this, that, and the other. And ultimately, then they fired me
Anyway.
A couple weeks later. Yeah.
And what was the pretext for that?
Well, they wanted to get in the White House press office. They wanted a press pass. And they said, it's the stuff you're saying on the show isn't like a good look for Right Side. They're not going to let us into the White House if you're with us. But the pressure in this scenario came exclusively from the Daily Wire. Yes.
Unsurprising when it comes to those neocon stooges at the Daily Wire, right? But a few things to respond to here. As a matter of the Constitution and its original intent, originally the federal government didn't even control immigration. Those matters were left to the states. When it came to foreign immigration, there is the Privileges and Immunities Clause of the Constitution that essentially says that if you're a citizen of a state in the United States, you have the privileges and immunities of all the states that allowed for free transit between states where your property couldn't be confiscated. But that doesn't pertain to foreigners that come to the United States. Actually, the states maintained their own immigration restrictions when it came to foreigners prior to 1875. For almost an entire century, that was the case until the Page Act of 1875. So there wasn't even federal restrictions at all on immigration until that time. When it comes to the First Amendment, the First Amendment is a prohibition on the powers of Congress. Congress shall make no act abridging the freedom of speech. That's what it says in the First Amendment. And that didn't matter regardless the way it was originally intended to mean, whether you are a citizen or not. Congress couldn't pass an act restricting that. Now, did the Federalists violate that? Yeah, they did. They violated that actually soon after the Constitution's ink was dry with the Sedition Act of 1798 that brought anyone to criminal court who was bringing either the president or members of Congress under ill repute. They prosecuted something like 25 people for levying criticisms toward John Adams. This was obviously unconstitutional, and rightly so. Jefferson and Madison organized a strategy to nullify it in Kentucky and Virginia. They wrote the Kentucky and Virginia Resolutions of 1798. That got overturned, and that was, a very sad blot in our history. So the feds have tried to violate that, but there was no expectation or understanding among the ratifiers that you would be able to curtail someone's ability to speak just because they were a foreigner. Now, states could set their own immigration restrictions for foreigners. They could say, like, we're not going to allow you to stay in our state if you do X, Y, and Z, and that could be the case. But, the federal government's completely usurped all immigration control and regulations now. Some people conflate this with naturalization because there is a naturalization clause in the Constitution that allows Congress to set what's called a uniform code of naturalization, but that has nothing to do with immigration. That has to do with a process and pathway to citizenship. So all that being said, I'm not that surprised how Nick has been handled here. This is the reaction of the Israel First crowd in so many ways and in so many avenues that it's driven a lot of people away from this Israel First mentality, or at least made many people question it. Even some of the most die-hard pro-Israel fanatics on October 7th are now unwilling to even defend Netanyahu. Like Coleman Hughes in his recent debate with Dave Smith. He said it straight up, I'm not going to defend Netanyahu. Well, that's a far cry from where people were the day after October 7th, on October 8th, 2023. And Nick's rise, whether you like it or not, he's here. You had to deal with him. You should deal with him via arguments, because if you want to curtail anti-Semitism, it's best to actually argue against what he has to say rather than trying to shut him down, because he's arrived. You have to deal with him now. I mean, Tucker's talked to him, Dave Smith's talked to him. He has one of the biggest Rumble shows now. You know, he's been removed from YouTube and I think several other social media platforms, but he's huge on Twitter. He's huge on Rumble. You can try to ignore him as much as you want, but I think ignoring him now is counterintuitive. So I try to address his arguments. I agree with some of them and disagree with many of them. Many people have picked up on that on my channel. In this case, it was mostly in agreement, but that's where we stand now. So Nick's rise, again, if you think this man's a monster, the Zionists built this monster. The Ben Shapiros and Daily Wire, connoisseurs of the world built this monster. And that's what you get now. Hate to say it. Argue with them or not, but that's the case. So what do you guys have to say? Do you think I'm right on this? Do you think I'm not hard enough on Nick? Do you think that he has arrived and arguments have to be used to deal with him now in a new media landscape rather than just trying to cancel him? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. Also subscribe to Tucker. Great to see these two talk. I'll be releasing more videos from these segments. I think there's some interesting moments here. And if you like this video, please consider becoming a YouTube member. You can click the join button below, become a member, and if you support me that way, I'll greatly appreciate it. And in return for that good deed, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public. Also, if you want a free copy of my first book, absolutely free, click the link in the description below, libertyvault.net. That's where you go, plug in your email address. I'll send it directly to you. No obligations, no cost whatsoever. And that tells the story of how we went from a decentralized League of States to a centralized world empire embroiled in the Israel First mentality now, regardless of the presidential occupant of my lifetime. Every single one have dealt in this way. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.